The prison floated in empty space far from any star or planet. It was called the Velen Containment Complex, and it was the most secure prison in the entire galaxy. For over 1,000 years, no prisoner had ever escaped from this place. Not one, not ever. The prison held the most dangerous beings from hundreds of different worlds. There were creatures who could read minds and control thoughts. There were warriors who could bend metal with their bare hands. There were digital beings who could hack into any computer system. The prison had special cells and security systems designed to stop each type of prisoner. The warden of this prison was named Krell-Ax. He was a tall, insect-like alien with multiple eyes and sharp mandibles. His species, the Velens, had built this prison and ran it as their business. They were very proud of their perfect record. No escapes in 1,000 years. One day a new prisoner arrived. His name was Jake Morrison. He was a human, a lieutenant in the Terran Navy. His small ship had been captured when it crossed into the wrong area of space. The war between his people and another alien race had been going on for years, and Jake was just unlucky enough to get caught. When Krell-Ax looked at the file on Jake, he was not impressed. Humans were a new species in the galaxy. They had only been traveling between stars for about 200 years. They had no special powers. They could not read minds. They could not move things with their thoughts. They were not particularly strong compared to most other species. They were just ordinary. 4 large guards brought Jake through the prison. He was wearing restraints on his hands and feet. The guards were much bigger than him, and they carried weapons that could stun or kill. Jake looked around carefully as they walked. He saw the metal walls, the energy barriers, and the many locked doors. Everything looked very secure. The chief security officer was a being made of crystal named Jarn. It asked Krell-Ax where to put the human prisoner. Jarn suggested high security because Jake was a military officer. Krell-Ax clicked his mandibles, which was how his species showed dismissal. He said humans were not dangerous. They had no powers, they were weak, and their technology was basic. Standard security would be enough. The guards took Jake to cell block 7. The corridors were like a maze, twisting and turning. Each section had energy barriers that needed special authorization to pass through. The walls were made of a super-strong metal that could withstand weapons from spaceships. The gravity changed in different sections, making it hard to know which way was up or down. Jake's cell was a cube, about 3 meters on each side. The walls hummed with a containment field that would stop any attempt to break through. In one corner was a small area for hygiene. A hard bed extended from one wall. An energy field covered the entrance like a shimmering curtain. 2 guards stood outside in the corridor. Jarn spoke to Jake in a voice that echoed. It told him he would stay here until his government could negotiate his release. If he cooperated, things would be easier. If he tried to resist, it would be pointless. This prison had never had an escape in 1,047 years. Jake nodded slowly and said he understood. The guards left and Jake was alone. He sat down on the hard bed and closed his eyes. To anyone watching, he looked like he was resting or maybe sleeping. But he was not resting. He was thinking. Humans did not have telepathy. They could not manipulate energy or matter with their minds. But humans had other qualities. They had patience. They could recognize patterns. They had something almost crazy in their nature that made them refuse to accept when something was impossible. And most important, they had imagination. Jake opened his eyes and began to study his cell. He looked at every wall, every corner, every surface. He examined the energy field at the entrance. He tested the hygiene station. He pressed his hand against different parts of the walls to feel the vibrations. Over the next few days, Jake established a routine. He woke up when the artificial lights came on to simulate morning. He did exercises in the small space of his cell, push-ups and sit-ups and stretches. He ate the bland, nutritional paste that came from a dispenser 3 times a day. He sat quietly for hours. The guards began to relax around him. He was not causing trouble. He was not trying to escape. He seemed to accept his situation. But Jake was always watching and always learning. During his exercises, he noticed tiny changes in the gravity field. The containment system created small variations that most people would never notice, but they followed a pattern. During meals, he timed how long it took for the food dispenser to work. Exactly 4.3 seconds every time, and during that time, the energy field on the dispenser slot weakened just a tiny bit. He counted everything. He counted the guards' footsteps. He counted how long each shift lasted. Every 8 hours and 17 minutes, the guards changed shifts. During the change, there was a gap of 42 seconds when both sets of guards were busy with their security procedures and not watching as carefully. Jake listened to all the sounds in the corridor. He learned to tell the difference between a regular patrol and a maintenance check, just by the sound of footsteps and equipment. Different species walked differently. Different tasks had different rhythms. He also talked to the guards sometimes. Not much, just small questions. Where did they come from? How long had they worked here? What was life like on their homeworlds? Most guards ignored him, but some answered. Slowly, Jake learned about the prison. He learned that the prison did not have many workers. Most of the security was automated systems and computers. He learned that the guards came from 17 different species, which sometimes made it hard for them to communicate with each other. He learned that the main computer was in the central hub, protected by many layers of security that only Warden Krellax could authorize. None of this information seemed useful for escaping. But Jake was not planning to escape tomorrow or next week. He was playing a much longer game. He was gathering pieces of a puzzle, and eventually those pieces would fit together. 6 weeks passed. Jake continued his routine. He exercised. He ate. He studied. He waited. The guards thought he was just a quiet prisoner who had accepted his fate. Warden Krellax had already forgotten about him. But in Jake's mind, a plan was slowly forming. It was not a plan based on strength or special powers. It was a plan based on patience, observation, and understanding. Jake was learning how the prison worked. More importantly, he was learning how the people who ran the prison thought, and that knowledge he knew would be more valuable than any superpower. 2 months passed since Jake arrived at the prison. To everyone watching, he seemed like the perfect prisoner. He never caused trouble. He never complained. He just followed his daily routine without any problems. But Jake was far from idle. Every single day he was learning something new. During his morning exercises, he had discovered something interesting about the gravity field in his cell. Most species would not notice it, but Jake had been paying very close attention. The field had tiny fluctuations, small changes that happened at specific times. These changes followed a pattern. After several weeks, Jake had memorized the entire pattern. The food dispenser was also interesting. Every time it delivered the nutritional paste, it took exactly 4.3 seconds. During those seconds, the energy field that protected the dispenser opening had to weaken slightly to let the food through. It was a tiny weakness, barely noticeable, but it was consistent. Jake kept counting and timing everything. He knew exactly when each guard shift started and ended. He knew which guards were careful and which ones were lazy. He knew which ones would talk to him and which ones ignored him completely. He also noticed something important about the prison itself. The Vallons had designed it to hold prisoners with special powers. There were systems to block telepathy. There were fields to prevent energy manipulation. There were barriers to stop physical strength. But all these systems assumed the prisoners would try to use their powers to escape. Nobody had designed the prison to stop someone who had no powers at all. During his 10th week in prison, something important happened. A new prisoner arrived in his cell block. The prisoner was named Voss, and he was from a species called the Drexians. The Drexians were known for being very smart with technology. Voss had been imprisoned because he created an artificial intelligence that almost destroyed an entire sector's economy. Voss was placed in a cell 3 doors down from Jake. The cells had solid walls between them so they could not see each other. They could not talk to each other directly. The guards made sure of that. But Jake had an idea. He started leaving his food tray in specific patterns after meals. He would arrange the leftover paste in mathematical sequences. At first, the patterns were random. Then slowly they became more complex. Jake knew that someone as smart as Voss would eventually notice. After 2 weeks, something changed. Voss's food tray started showing similar patterns. He had understood. The 2 prisoners had found a way to communicate that the guards never noticed. The guards were watching for escape attempts, for violence, for hacking. They were not watching food trays for mathematical codes. Through these patterns, Jake and Voss began to share information. It was slow and difficult, but it worked. Jake learned that Voss had been studying the prison's electrical systems. By measuring the heat variations in his cell walls, Voss had mapped out the entire power grid. Voss learned that Jake had been tracking the guard rotations with perfect accuracy. He had memorized every shift change, every patrol route, every security protocol. Voss was impressed. For a species with no special abilities, humans had remarkable memories. The 2 prisoners developed a more complex communication system. They used the timing of their activities to send messages. Jake would exercise at specific times, and Voss would respond by using his hygiene station at specific times. It looked completely random to anyone watching, but it was actually a sophisticated code. 3 months after Jake's arrival, he received his first visitor. Her name was Lisa Hayes, and she was a diplomatic attaché from the Terran Coalition. She had come to negotiate for his release. The meeting took place in a secure room with Warden Krellax watching through a transparent barrier. Lisa sat down across from Jake. She told him that his government was working on getting him released, but it was complicated. There were legal issues about where he had been captured and which government had jurisdiction. Jake nodded and said he understood. He could wait. But as they talked about simple things like his family and life on Earth, Jake was actually sending coded information. He mentioned his uncle Raymond, who taught him patience. He talked about learning to fix things from his father. He casually mentioned how much he missed working with his hands. Lisa was trained in diplomatic communication. She understood the hidden meanings. Her responses told Jake that the Terran Coalition knew where he was. They wanted to help him, but they could not do it officially because it would cause a diplomatic crisis. However, if Jake could create an opportunity to escape, they would be ready to pick him up. When Lisa left, Jake felt relieved. He now knew he would not be on his own if he managed to escape. He just had to get out of the prison first. Krellax watched the human return to his cell and dismissed him from his thoughts. The prisoner showed no signs of planning anything. He just exercised, ate, and slept. He seemed resigned to his imprisonment. The warden had no idea that Jake's plan was taking shape in ways he could never imagine. Jake began the next phase of his plan. It started with small accidents. During his morning exercises, he accidentally hit the force field projector on his cell door. It flickered briefly. The guards responded immediately and called maintenance. A repair technician came to fix it. The technician was from a species called the Quillans. They had multiple arms and were known for being very precise in their work. Jake watched carefully as the technician repaired the projector. He asked innocent questions about how it worked. The Quillan was proud of their work and did not see any harm in explaining things to a powerless human prisoner. Jake memorized every detail of what the technician did. 2 weeks later, another accident happened. This time it was a different system in his cell. Another technician came and Jake learned more. Over the next several weeks, Jake became known as the prisoner who somehow kept breaking things in his cell. It was not violent or threatening. Things just seemed to malfunction around him. The guards grew frustrated. Krellax ordered a complete diagnostic of Jake's cell. They checked every system and found nothing wrong. What they did not realize was that Jake had learned exactly how to cause these malfunctions, using precise physical movements and timing. He was exploiting tiny tolerances in the equipment that the designers never considered. Meanwhile, his communication with Voss became more sophisticated. Through their timing codes, they shared everything they knew. Jake shared his knowledge of guard schedules and security protocols. Voss shared his maps of the power grid and computer systems. Together, they began to see something that neither could see alone. They began to see the prison's real weakness. The Velen containment complex was designed to be impregnable. Every security system had backups. Every protocol had redundancies. But there was one assumption built into every layer of security. The designers assumed that prisoners would try to escape through force or trickery. They would try to break through walls or hack computers. No one had considered that someone might try to make the prison let them out willingly. Jake's plan required perfect timing. It required the cooperation of other prisoners, even if they did not know they were cooperating. He needed to create chaos that looked random, but was actually carefully orchestrated. He started with what he had learned about the other prisoners in the facility. Some species became agitated by certain electromagnetic frequencies. Others would react to logical paradoxes. Some were territorial and would fight if their space was violated. Through Voss, Jake began sending patterns into the prison systems through his continued malfunctions. These patterns would be noticed by other prisoners on a subconscious level. Mathematical sequences appeared in maintenance schedules. Logical inconsistencies appeared in automated announcements. Ventilation patterns changed in subtle ways. The prisoners began to grow restless. A Thessian mindwalker started humming constantly. A member of the Silicon Collective kept demanding meetings about logical problems in the prison rules. Kryn warlords became aggressive during their exercise periods. Krellax noticed the increase in incidents, but he saw no connection between them. Each problem seemed related to that specific prisoner's nature. He had no way of knowing that a human 5 cell blocks away was conducting the entire operation. 6 months and 2 weeks after his arrival, Jake was ready. He had every piece of information he needed. He understood the prison systems, its procedures, and most importantly, its blind spots. The time had come to do something that everyone said was impossible. The time had come to escape. Jake caused one final malfunction in his cell. This time, it was his life support system. The oxygen levels began to drop slowly. It was not fast enough to trigger an emergency alert right away. But within an hour, Jake would be in real danger. What the guards did not know was that Jake had trained his body for months to create exactly this situation. He had learned to control his breathing and heart rate. He could make his body look like it was suffocating even when he was still okay. It was dangerous, but Jake had practiced it carefully. The guards noticed that Jake was having trouble breathing. His face was turning pale. His chest was heaving. The medical sensors in his cell confirmed he was in distress. The guards called for maintenance to fix the life support system. But at the exact same moment, other things began to happen throughout the prison. Voss triggered a calculated overload in the electrical system near his cell. The lights flickered. 3 other prisoners, responding to the patterns Jake had planted in their minds over weeks, started causing their own disturbances. A member of the Silicon Collective launched into a complicated argument with the computer system that threatened to crash it. 2 Kryn warlords started a territorial fight that required 4 guards to stop them. Suddenly, the prison that had run perfectly for 1,000 years was experiencing multiple problems at once. Guards were being pulled in different directions. Maintenance teams were trying to respond to several emergencies. Computer technicians were dealing with system glitches, and in the middle of all this chaos was a human who appeared to be dying in his cell. The security protocols were clear. If a prisoner's life was in danger, they had to be moved to the medical bay. Jake's oxygen levels were critically low. The guards had no choice. 4 guards came to Jake's cell. They put restraints on him and escorted him through the corridors. Jake was breathing heavily, looking weak and disoriented, but in his mind he was completely alert. He was counting every step, noting every turn. The route to the medical bay was exactly as he had memorized it from Voss's descriptions. The medical bay had 2 Quellan technicians. They were good at healing but not trained for security. As they began treating Jake and stabilizing his oxygen levels, the prison's problems continued to multiply. Voss's power fluctuation was spreading through the facility. Non-critical systems were experiencing delays. Doors took longer to open. Communication systems had brief interruptions. Nothing that required a full emergency lockdown, but enough to keep everyone distracted and frustrated. Jake lay on the medical platform, his breathing slowly returning to normal. He was counting seconds in his head. Everything had to happen at exactly the right time. In cell block 9, a Thessian prisoner began broadcasting telepathic static that disrupted the neural interfaces of nearby guards. In the recreation area, the Kryn fight escalated, requiring even more security personnel. The Silicon Collective members' logic problem had now infected 3 separate computer subsystems. Krelek stood in the command center, his multiple eyes scanning the displays. He had never seen so many incidents happening at once. Each one individually was manageable, but together they were overwhelming his staff. His mandibles clicked in frustration, but he still did not see the pattern. He did not realize that every incident was timed to pull resources away from specific areas, to create gaps in surveillance, to keep key personnel busy. Jake's opportunity came during a guard shift change. The shift change was already complicated by all the power fluctuations happening throughout the prison. For exactly 37 seconds, the medical bay had only 2 guards instead of 4. Both guards were distracted by urgent communications about the situation in cell block 9. Jake moved quickly but smoothly. Over the past 6 months, he had constructed a small tool from pieces of broken equipment in his cell. The pieces were so small and insignificant that no one noticed they were missing. Now Jake had that tool hidden in his hand. He touched the medical bay's computer terminal with the tool. It exploited a security vulnerability that Voss had discovered. The tool did not give Jake full control of the system. It just triggered a false alert that the medical bay's sterilization field was malfunctioning. When a sterilization field fails, the automated safety system opens the hazardous materials storage compartment. Inside that compartment was an environmental suit, designed for technicians who might need to work in vacuum conditions. Jake grabbed the suit and put it on in less than 5 seconds. The faceplate sealed just as the guards turned back to check on him. The guards saw a prisoner in a full environmental suit moving toward them. Their training took over immediately. They moved to intercept, expecting Jake to try to fight them. But Jake was not trying to fight. He had studied how each guard species reacted to threats. Felonian guards used their strength to grapple with opponents. Jake twisted as they grabbed him, using their own momentum. He slammed one guard into the medical equipment. The impact triggered a sedative release meant for agitated patients. The guard collapsed immediately. The second guard was faster and more experienced. But Jake was not trying to overpower him. He was trying to reach the emergency evacuation panel on the wall. Every room in the prison had one, designed to seal and protect people inside if there was sudden decompression. Jake's fist hit the emergency button. Heavy blast doors began to descend from the ceiling. The second guard lunged for Jake, but Jake rolled under the closing door. He came up on the other side just as the medical bay sealed itself shut with both Quellen technicians and one unconscious guard trapped inside. Alarms shrieked throughout the facility. Jake's escape had been detected, but he was now in a service corridor wearing an environmental suit that temporarily masked his biological signature. He had perhaps 2 minutes before the security systems adapted and located him. Jake ran through the corridors. He was not running randomly. He was following the exact path he had memorized. Left at the first junction, straight through the maintenance section, right at the power distribution hub. Every turn brought him closer to his destination. He was heading for the waste disposal system. The prison's waste disposal system processed garbage and biological waste from hundreds of prisoners. It was a sophisticated recycling system that broke down organic matter, extracted useful components, and ejected the rest into space in compressed pellets. The system was automated and heavily shielded. The designers considered it a complete non-issue for security. The processing tubes were barely large enough for a child to fit through, much less an adult. No one would ever try to escape through the garbage system. But Jake had been preparing for this for 6 months. He had been carefully reducing his body weight. He had rationed his food, eating just barely enough to stay healthy. He had done specific exercises designed to reduce muscle mass while maintaining flexibility. He had lost 15 kilograms over 6 months, pushing his body to its limits. Jake reached the waste processing station. Security teams were converging on his last known position, but Jake had bought himself precious seconds by triggering false sensor readings throughout the facility. Another trick he had learned from his equipment malfunctions. The processing tube entrance was 1 meter in diameter. It was lined with sensors and sterilization fields. Jake squeezed himself into the opening. His environmental suit scraped against the walls. The fit was incredibly tight. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to get out, but he forced himself forward, centimeter by centimeter. Behind him, he heard guards entering the waste processing station. Ahead, the tube became even narrower as it approached the compression chamber. Jake had studied the blueprints that Voss provided. There was a maintenance bypass shaft that branched off just before the compression zone. If he missed it, he would be crushed and ejected into space as a waste pellet. His hand found the edge of the bypass. Jake twisted his body, feeling his joints protest, and pulled himself into the maintenance shaft. This space was even smaller, designed for remote drones, not people. Above him, he could hear footsteps. The guards were searching the waste processing station, but they were looking for someone hiding, not someone crawling through impossible spaces. Jake crawled forward. Every muscle in his body burned with pain. The environmental suit's oxygen supply was running low. It had been designed for short emergency use, not extended activity in tight spaces. But ahead he could see his goal, an external maintenance hatch. According to Voss's information, this was the one point in the prison's hull where the armor was thinnest. It was reinforced by energy shielding instead of multiple layers of metal. The designers had needed to allow maintenance drones external access, and this was the compromise they had made. Jake reached the hatch. His improvised tool interfaced with the lock. It ran through a bypass sequence that Voss had calculated. The calculation had a 63% chance of working. Jake had decided months ago that those odds were good enough. The hatch opened. Beyond was the darkness of space. And there, exactly where it was supposed to be, was a small stealth pod. It was Terran design, almost invisible to sensors, holding position just 100 meters from the prison hull. Lisa Hayes had kept her promise. Jake pushed himself out of the hatch and into the void of space. For a moment he floated in absolute silence. The prison behind him was a massive structure of metal and lights. The stealth pod ahead was a small dark shape against the stars. The environmental suit had a limited propulsion system for emergencies. Jake activated it. Small jets on his back fired, pushing him toward the pod. The movement was slow, agonizingly slow. Every second that passed increased the chance that the prison's sensors would detect him. Inside the prison, alarms were screaming. The security system had detected the hull breach. Krelax was staring at his displays in disbelief. The human prisoner had somehow gotten outside the facility. Guards were rushing to the location, but they were too late. The stealth pod's airlock opened. Jake could see the pilot inside, a woman in a Terran Navy uniform. Her name was Kate Palmer, and she was already preparing the pod for immediate departure. Jake had 15 seconds before the prison's defensive weapons would lock onto the pod and destroy it. Kate knew this too. The pod was already moving, its stealth systems pushed to maximum capacity. 10 seconds. Jake's hands grabbed the airlock handles. He pulled himself inside. Kate was already closing the hatch behind him. 5 seconds. The pod's engines came to life, pushing against the laws of physics with everything they had. 0. The prison's weapons fired at where the pod had been, but the pod was already gone, vanishing into faster-than-light travel. The weapons hit empty space. Jake collapsed on the floor of the pod, gasping for breath. Kate kept her attention on the controls, making sure they had cleanly escaped. After a full minute, she allowed herself to look back at Jake. "Welcome aboard, Lieutenant Morrison," she said with a slight smile. "That was the craziest extraction I've ever done." Jake managed a weak laugh. "That was the craziest escape anyone has ever done." The pod traveled for 6 hours before rendezvousing with a Terran Coalition cruiser called the Defiant. As soon as Jake was aboard, he was taken to the medical bay. Doctors examined him thoroughly. He was malnourished and exhausted, but otherwise healthy. They were amazed that he had managed to squeeze through spaces that seemed impossible for a human body. After medical clearance, Jake spent 3 days in debriefing. Intelligence officers wanted to know everything about his imprisonment and escape. They recorded every detail, every observation, every technique he had used. Admiral Peter Grant, the head of Naval Intelligence, sat in on the final debriefing session. He was an older man with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen many years of service. When Jake finished his account, the Admiral shook his head in amazement. "Lieutenant Morrison, what you accomplished should not have been possible. The Velen Containment Complex has held beings with powers we cannot even comprehend. Telepaths, energy manipulators, creatures that exist in multiple dimensions at once, and yet you, a human with no special abilities, succeeded where they all failed." Jake shrugged. "Sir, that is exactly why I succeeded. They designed the facility to contain beings with special abilities. They never thought to prepare for someone ordinary." An intelligence officer named Claire Bennett looked up from her tablet. She had been taking notes throughout the debriefing. "Your plan required an incredible amount of patience, 6 months of observation, of building connections with other prisoners, of learning complex systems through trial and error. Most people would have given up or tried something desperate. Most people would have assumed it was impossible," Jake corrected. "But humans have a problem with accepting impossible. We see a mountain, we climb it. We see an ocean, we cross it. We see stars, we find a way to reach them. Impossible is just a challenge we have not figured out yet." Admiral Grant nodded slowly. "And the Valons made their mistake by judging humans against other species. They looked at what we could not do instead of what we could do." "Exactly," Jake agreed. "They saw that we had no telepathy, so they did not worry about our thoughts. We had no energy manipulation, so they did not worry about power systems. We were not as strong as many species, so they did not see us as physically dangerous. But they missed what we do have." "Which is?" Claire asked. "Determination, pattern recognition, patience, creativity, the ability to learn and adapt. These are not powers that show up on any scanner or ability assessment. But they are what allowed us to survive and thrive on Earth long before we ever reached the stars." The debriefing continued for hours, but word of Jake's escape was already spreading. Throughout the Terran Coalition military, people were talking about the man who escaped the unescapable prison. The story grew with each retelling, becoming a legend. Back at the Velen Containment Complex, Warden Krelax faced the consequences of the escape. An investigation was launched immediately. The Valon Confederacy could not believe that their perfect record had been broken. Insurance companies that had guaranteed the prison's security were demanding answers. Governments that held prisoners there were questioning whether their most dangerous criminals were truly secure. The investigation revealed the truth. Jake's escape had not relied on brute force or advanced technology. It had been a masterpiece of social engineering, psychological manipulation, and patience. Every malfunction, every incident, every apparent coincidence had been carefully planned and executed. The investigators were stunned by the level of detail in Jake's planning. He had memorized guard schedules down to the second. He had mapped the entire facility through indirect observation. He had manipulated other prisoners without them even knowing they were being manipulated. He had exploited not the prison's physical weaknesses, but the psychological weaknesses of those who ran it. The Velons had been so confident in their security systems that they never considered the human factor. They never thought someone would spend 6 months patiently gathering information. They never imagined someone would reduce their body weight to fit through a garbage disposal tube. They never anticipated that a prisoner would coordinate multiple incidents to create a distraction. Security experts throughout the galaxy studied Jake's escape. They called it a human-style operation. It was brilliant not because of what it did, but because of how it thought. Jake had approached the problem in a way that no other species had considered. Voss, the Drexian who had helped Jake, was moved to maximum security. But even as they upgraded his containment, the experts worried. The damage was done. Jake had proven that the prison's assumptions were flawed. Other prisoners were now studying his methods, looking for their own opportunities. The Terran Coalition's diplomatic corps had to manage the political fallout. The Velons demanded Jake's return. The Terrans refused. Negotiations were tense. Ambassador Richard Cole represented the Terran Coalition in the talks. He stated firmly that Jake had been held without proper legal process. His escape, while unprecedented, was legitimate under Terran military law. The coalition would not apologize for the resourcefulness of their personnel. The diplomatic standoff lasted weeks. Eventually, a compromise was reached. The Terran coalition agreed to pay reparations for damage to the facility. In return, the Velons acknowledged that Jake's imprisonment had questionable legal standing. Neither side was completely happy, but both could claim partial victory. For Jake, life began to return to normal, though nothing would ever be quite the same. He was promoted to captain and awarded a medal for extraordinary service. He was also assigned to naval intelligence, where his skills at observation and planning could be used in less dangerous ways. But Jake never forgot his time in the prison. The experience had taught him something important about humanity's place in the galaxy. Humans might not be the strongest or the smartest or the most technologically advanced species, but they had qualities that were easy to underestimate and very dangerous to ignore. The galaxy was learning a new lesson. Humans were not just another species. They were something different, something that did not fit the normal patterns. They were ordinary enough to be dismissed and extraordinary enough to surprise everyone. And that combination, as Jake had proven, could be more powerful than any superpower in the universe. 6 months after his escape, Jake stood in front of a large auditorium at the Terran Naval Academy. The room was packed with young cadets, all eager to hear from the man who had achieved what everyone said was impossible. They looked at him with a mixture of awe and curiosity. Jake felt uncomfortable with all the attention. He was not a hero in his own mind. He was just someone who had refused to accept his situation and had worked hard to change it. But he understood that his story meant something to these young people, so he would tell it. "I have been asked to explain how I escaped from the Velon containment complex," Jake began. "The truth is, I did not do anything that any of you could not do. I observed my surroundings. I made a plan. I adapted when things changed. I was patient. These are not superhuman abilities. They are just human abilities." A cadet in the front row raised her hand. "Sir, but you spent 6 months planning and preparing. How did you maintain hope for that long?" Jake considered the question. "I did not think about it as 6 months. I thought about it as 1 day at a time. Each day I learned something new. Each day I made a small amount of progress. I did not focus on the final goal, because that seemed too far away. I focused on what I could do that day." Another cadet spoke up. "The reports say you reduced your body weight by 15 kilograms. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was," Jake admitted. "There were days when I was so hungry I could barely think. But I reminded myself why I was doing it. Every kilogram I lost was one step closer to fitting through that disposal tube. I made the pain meaningful by connecting it to my goal. A cadet near the back asked, "What was the hardest part of the escape?" Jake thought for a moment. The crawling through the disposal tube. It was tight, dark, and terrifying. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to go back. But I had come too far to quit. I just kept moving forward 1 centimeter at a time. "What if you had been caught?" another cadet asked. "Then I would have been put in maximum security and lost my chance," Jake said honestly. But I calculated the risks. I decided that trying and failing was better than not trying at all. Sometimes you have to take risks if you want to change your situation. The questions continued for over an hour. The cadets wanted to know everything. How did he communicate with Voss? How did he memorize all the guard schedules? How did he cause the equipment malfunctions? How did he stay mentally strong during months of imprisonment? Jake answered each question as honestly as he could. He did not try to make himself sound heroic. He talked about the fear, the doubt, the mistakes he made. He wanted them to understand that he was just a normal person who had done something extraordinary through preparation and persistence. When the lecture ended, several cadets approached him personally. They thanked him for his service and for sharing his story. One young woman told him that she had been thinking about quitting the academy, but his story had inspired her to keep going. Jake felt a strange mix of emotions. He had not escaped the prison to become famous or to inspire people. He had done it because he wanted to go home. But if his experience could help others, then perhaps the suffering had additional meaning. Over the following weeks, Jake's story continued to spread beyond just the military. Civilian news organizations wanted to interview him. He appeared on several popular programs, always careful to present himself as an ordinary person rather than a superhero. He wanted people to understand that humans did not need special powers to accomplish extraordinary things. The response from the broader galactic community was mixed. Some species viewed Jake's escape with admiration. They respected the intelligence and determination he had shown. Other species felt threatened. If one human could escape the most secure prison in the galaxy, what else might humans be capable of? Trade negotiations with other species became more complex. Some governments wanted to establish closer relationships with the Terran coalition, seeing humans as potentially valuable allies. Others became more cautious, implementing additional security measures when dealing with human diplomats or traders. The Velon containment complex underwent massive changes. They implemented new protocols specifically designed to detect and prevent human-style escape attempts. They increased the frequency of psychological evaluations for prisoners. They improved communication between guards of different species. They added additional monitoring to seemingly insignificant activities like food tray arrangements and exercise timing. But security experts throughout the galaxy knew that these changes were reactive, not proactive. Jake had found weaknesses that the Velons never knew existed. There were likely other weaknesses that nobody had discovered yet. The fundamental problem was that the prison had been designed based on assumptions about how prisoners would behave, and Jake had violated those assumptions. Other maximum security facilities began reviewing their own procedures. They looked for similar blind spots, similar assumptions that might be exploited. The entire industry of high-security containment was forced to reconsider its approach. Meanwhile, Jake tried to settle into his new role in naval intelligence. His job was to analyze potential security vulnerabilities in Terran coalition facilities and operations. If he could find weaknesses in the galaxy's most secure prison, he could certainly find weaknesses in human installations. But the work felt different now. Jake found himself constantly thinking about the prison, about Voss and the other prisoners he had left behind. He wondered if any of them would try to follow his example. He wondered if his escape had made their lives harder by triggering increased security measures. One evening, Jake received a message through secure channels. It was from Lisa Hayes, the diplomatic attaché who had visited him in prison. She wanted to meet with him privately. They met in a quiet restaurant in the capital city. Lisa ordered dinner for both of them, and they made small talk until the food arrived. Then she got to the point. "Jake, I need to tell you something about your escape," she said quietly. Something that was not included in the official reports. Jake leaned forward, listening carefully. "When you were first captured, we immediately began planning a rescue operation," Lisa explained. "We had a team ready to assault the prison, but the political cost would have been enormous. It might have started a war with the Velon Confederacy and their allies. I understand, Jake said. That is why I knew I had to escape on my own. Yes, but here is what you do not know, Lisa continued. We were monitoring you the entire time. We had sensors watching the prison from a distance. We saw you establishing your routine. We saw the equipment malfunctions. We recognized that you were planning something. Jake felt a chill. You knew what I was planning? Not exactly, Lisa admitted. We knew you were gathering information and testing systems. We did not know your specific plan, but we knew you had not given up, and we made the decision to wait and see what you would do. You risked my life on a guess, Jake said, his voice tight. We risked your life on you, Lisa corrected. We believed that if any human could find a way out, it would be you. Your psychological profile showed exceptional determination and problem-solving ability. We gambled that you would create an opportunity for extraction. Jake sat back in his chair, processing this information. So the stealth pod was not just a contingency. You were actively hoping I would escape. Yes, Lisa said simply. And you did not disappoint us. What you accomplished exceeded our most optimistic projections. You did not just escape. You did it in a way that fundamentally changed how the galaxy views human capabilities. Jake thought about this for a long time. Part of him was angry that he had been used as an experiment. But another part understood the strategic logic. His escape had achieved diplomatic goals that a military rescue never could have. I need you to understand something, Lisa said. Your escape was not just about you. It was a message to every other species in the galaxy. It told them that humans should not be underestimated. It told them that we are creative, persistent, and dangerous when we need to be. That message may prevent future conflicts because other species will think twice before challenging us. So I was a propaganda tool, Jake said. You were a demonstration, Lisa corrected. A demonstration of human potential. And now, because of what you did, every human in the galaxy is a little bit safer. Other species know that we do not need special powers to be formidable. Jake left the dinner feeling conflicted. He understood the strategic value of what he had done, but it was strange to think that his suffering and struggle had been part of a larger calculation. Still, he could not deny the results. Humans standing in the galaxy had improved. The Terran coalition had gained respect, and he had made it home alive. Perhaps that was enough. 3 years passed since Jake's escape from the Velon containment complex. Life had changed in ways he never expected. He was now a captain in naval intelligence, respected and well known throughout the Terran coalition. But fame had never been comfortable for him. Jake stood on the observation deck of a space station orbiting Earth, looking down at his home planet. The blue and green sphere reminded him of why he had fought so hard to escape. Everything he had done, all the suffering and risk had been worth it to see this view again. A voice behind him interrupted his thoughts. Captain Morrison, I thought I might find you here. Jake turned to see Admiral Grant approaching. The older man had been promoted and now oversaw all of naval intelligence. He had also become something of a mentor to Jake over the past few years. Just thinking, sir, Jake said. About the prison? Grant asked, joining him at the window. Always about the prison, Jake admitted. I escaped 3 years ago, but I think about it every day. About the people I left behind. About whether I could have done things differently. Grant nodded thoughtfully. You know that your escape changed galactic politics in significant ways. Lisa told me, Jake said. I'm still not sure how I feel about being a strategic asset. You are much more than that, Grant said. You proved something important. You prove that humans belong in the galaxy not because we are the strongest or the smartest, but because we are the most persistent. We do not give up. We find ways around problems that other species think are impossible. Is that why you asked to meet me here? Jake asked. Grant smiled slightly. Actually, I have news. The Velon Confederacy has requested a meeting with you. They want to discuss what they call security improvements to their facility. Jake raised his eyebrows. They want my help? After I embarrassed them in front of the entire galaxy? They want to learn from you, Grant explained. They realize now that their assumptions about human capabilities were wrong. They want to understand how you think, how you plan. They want to make sure no one else can replicate your escape. And what does the coalition want me to do? Jake asked. That is up to you, Grant said. We will support whatever decision you make. But I will tell you this. Helping them improve their security might actually help future human prisoners. If you teach them to guard against human-style escapes, they might treat human prisoners with more respect. Jake thought about this for a long time. The idea of helping the Vallons bothered him on a personal level. But Grant had a point. If he could influence how they designed their security, he might be able to protect other humans in the future. I will do it, Jake decided. But on one condition. I want them to release Voss. He helped me escape, and he does not deserve to spend the rest of his life in that place. Grant nodded. I will see what I can arrange. 2 months later, Jake found himself back at the Vallon containment complex. This time, he was arriving as a guest consultant rather than a prisoner. The irony was not lost on him. Krelax met him at the docking bay. The warden looked older, more tired. The escape had clearly taken a toll on him. His perfect record had been destroyed, and his reputation along with it. Captain Morrison, Krelax said formally. Thank you for agreeing to this consultation. Warden Krelax, Jake replied with equal formality. I have one requirement before we begin. I want Voss released. Krelax's mandibles clicked in what might have been resignation. It has already been arranged. The Drexian government negotiated his release as part of the agreement that brought you here. He will be freed within the week. Jake felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Voss would be free. That made this visit worthwhile regardless of what else happened. Over the next 3 days, Jake walked through the prison as a free man. It was a strange experience, seeing the same corridors and cells without the weight of captivity. Security officers followed him everywhere, taking notes on his observations. Jake explained how he had studied the guard rotations. He showed them the tiny tolerances in equipment that he had exploited to cause malfunctions. He demonstrated how the timing of activities could be used for communication between prisoners. He explained the psychological aspects of his plan, how he had manipulated assumptions and expectations. The security officers were stunned by the level of detail in his planning. They had thought their systems were perfect, but Jake showed them dozens of small weaknesses. None of them would be enough for an escape on their own, but combined with patience and creativity, they became significant vulnerabilities. The fundamental problem, Jake explained during a meeting with the senior security staff, is that you designed this prison based on the assumption that prisoners would try to use their natural abilities to escape. Telepaths would try to control minds. Energy manipulators would try to break through barriers. Hackers would try to infiltrate computer systems. And humans? Sharn, the crystalline security chief, asked. Humans do not have any of those abilities, Jake said. So we use what we do have. We observe. We learn, we adapt. We are patient. These are not abilities you can block with technology. You can only counter them with better awareness and better procedures. Krelax spoke up. You are saying that the prison's greatest weakness is not in its physical structure or technology, but in the mindset of those who run it. Exactly, Jake agreed. You were so focused on containing extraordinary abilities that you forgot to guard against ordinary intelligence, applied with extraordinary patience. The discussions continued for 3 full days. Jake made dozens of recommendations for procedural changes. He suggested ways to detect patterns in prisoner behavior. He explained how to prevent the kind of social engineering he had used. He showed them blind spots in their surveillance systems. On the final day, Krelax asked Jake a personal question. Do you regret what you did? You destroyed my career and damaged the reputation of the entire Vallon Confederacy. Jake thought carefully before answering. I regret that my actions hurt people, but I do not regret escaping. I was held without proper legal process. I did what I needed to do to go home. If our positions were reversed, would you not have done the same? Krelax was silent for a moment. Then his mandibles moved in what might have been a smile. Yes, I would have done the same. Perhaps that is why I respect you even though you humiliated me. As Jake prepared to leave the prison for the second and final time, he took one last look at his old cell. It looked smaller than he remembered. The walls that had seemed so imposing now seemed almost fragile. He had spent 6 months in this tiny space, planning and preparing. It felt like a lifetime ago. A message arrived on his communication device. It was from Voss. The Drexian had been released as promised and was already back on his home world. The message was simple. Thank you, my friend. You gave me back my freedom. If you ever need anything, you only need to ask. Jake smiled. At least something good had come from all of this. He returned to Earth and tried to resume his normal life. But he quickly discovered that normal was no longer possible. He was too well known, too much of a symbol. Everywhere he went, people recognized him. They wanted to hear his story, to shake his hand, to tell him he had inspired them. Jake found it exhausting. He had never wanted to be famous. He had just wanted to go home. One evening, he received an unexpected visitor at his apartment. It was a young woman, barely 20 years old. She introduced herself as Sophie Crawford, a student at the university. "Captain Morrison, I hope you do not mind me coming here," she said nervously. "I wanted to thank you in person." "Thank me for what?" Jake asked, confused. "For showing me that being ordinary is enough," Sophie explained. "I always felt like I was not special. I do not have exceptional talents or abilities. I am just average at most things. But your story taught me that ordinary people can do extraordinary things if they are willing to work hard and be patient." Jake invited her in, and they talked for over an hour. Sophie told him about her struggles with self-confidence and her fears about the future. Jake shared his own doubts and insecurities, the moments during his imprisonment when he wanted to give up. "The thing about being ordinary," Jake said, "is that it means you have to work harder than people with natural talents. But it also means that everything you achieve is truly yours. You earned it through effort and determination, not because you were born with special advantages." Sophie left that evening with tears in her eyes, thanking him repeatedly. After she was gone, Jake sat alone in his apartment and thought about what he had told her. He realized that he had been struggling with the same issues. He had felt inadequate compared to other species with their special abilities. But his escape had proven that being human was special in its own way. Years continued to pass. Jake eventually retired from active service and took a position teaching at the Naval Academy. He found that he enjoyed working with young cadets, helping them understand that they did not need to be superhuman to succeed. They just needed to be persistent, creative, and willing to learn. The story of his escape became a standard part of military training. Every cadet learned about the importance of patience, observation, and thinking outside expected patterns. The escape was studied not just as a military operation, but as an example of human psychology and problem-solving.